Last year, I reviewed the Asus Prime AP201 Micro-ATX PC case, and it turned out to be one of the most popular reviews on the channel. It's also been the proud home of my personal gaming PC ever since. Now, the AP201 is a solid case, but since I run an air-cooled system and don't utilize its 360mm AIO support, that extra length just ends up consuming more desk space than necessary. I've been on the hunt for a more compact enclosure that doesn't compromise on style. That's when, during one of my late night dives into Newegg's endless listings, I stumble upon this, the DarkRock MH200. Could this budget-friendly doppelganger of my pixel-perfect AP201 be the perfect fit for me? And might it even be a smarter pick for many of you as well? We're about to dive in and see what the DarkRock MH200 has to offer. Let's do that. Hey guys, CJ from Elevated Systems. Before we dive into the MH200 review, I want to share something with you. If you appreciate tech deep dives free from sponsored messages or baked in ad reads, you found your spot. Here, everything is community powered, no hidden endorsements, just straight up tech and DIY goodness. If authentic content is your thing, consider subscribing and liking this video. Your click means more than you think. By supporting us, you help amplify our voice, reaching fellow tech enthusiasts and those just starting their journey. All right, let's get this review started with my standard rundown of the specs and features. The DarkRock MH200 is a sleek mid-tower micro-ATX case with dimensions that are compact yet accommodating. We're looking at a case that's 375mm in length, 213mm wide, and 447mm tall. It's designed for mini ITX or micro ATX motherboards. The case welcomes CPU tower coolers up to 165mm and officially supports graphics cards up to 330mm in length. However, I managed to fit in a 345mm card with room to spare for a front fan. It fits ATX power supplies up to 170mm as well. Airflow is a highlight here. The MH200 includes a 120mm ARGB fan at the rear for exhaust, and you can add two 120 or two 140mm fans on top, and up to three 120s or two 140s in the front. There are also mounting points for two 120mm fans on the bottom of the case. However, these aren't really accessible if you use a 2-slot or wider graphics card. Now, despite what the specs say about only supporting a 240 or 280mm radiator on top, I nudged the drive cage back, and although a tight fit, I was able to fit a 360mm AIO in the front. There are removable filters on the top and bottom. For storage, it comes with a drive sled at the base that fits one 2.5-inch SSD and one 3.5-inch hard drive. Plus, there's an extra SSD mounting point. Cable management is sufficient with several millimeters of space behind the motherboard tray and plenty of tie-down points to keep things neat. The front I/O panel is pretty robust, featuring a power and reset buttons, two USB Type-A ports with 5 gigabit per second speeds, headphone and microphone jacks, a USB Type-C port with up to 20 gigabit speeds, and an LED control button. Finally, the feature that really reeled me in, the fine square pixelated ventilation pattern that not only looks cool but also promotes great airflow. This pattern is reserved for the front and left side panels. The right side panel is solid steel, and along with the left side is secured with tabs and non-captive thumb screws. As for the price, the DarkRock MH200 currently has an MSRP of $60 US. When you're picking up a budget case like the DarkRock MH200, priced at $60, you expect some compromises, and they're mostly in the materials and build quality. To keep costs down, DarkRock opted for steel that's on the thinner side. I clocked it at about 0.75mm, and that's including the powder coating. What this means for you is that you'll need to handle the case with a bit more care during the build process. Apply too much force and you might drive a fan screw right through the steel or strip a thumb screw hole. And while we're not seeing gaps that rival those on a Cybertruck, The panel alignment isn't as precise as what you'd find on a pricier model. There are noticeable gaps slightly wider than I'd like, even for a case at this price point. The build experience in the DarkRock MH200 was largely positive, with a couple of small hiccups along the way. I kitted out the case with a trio of Inwind Jupiter 140mm fans, one on top and two in the front. There's a generous amount of space around the motherboard and plenty of cable pass-throughs, especially above. With over 70mm of clearance, you can easily fit some of the thickest radiators or AIOs on top without worrying about VRM or RAM clearance. The top PCIe expansion slot comes with a replaceable cover, but the other 3 slots are of the breakout variety, so you'll want to pop those out before you install the motherboard to prevent any damage. Now, the MH200 may not accommodate the biggest modern graphics cards, however, it did fit my 345mm card, which is longer than advertised and likely on the higher end of what most budget-focused builders will use. If you opt for a front-mounted AIO, the overall length for the graphics card will be a bit less, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that a 360mm AIO fits up front. This is a standout feature that DarkRock strangely didn't include in their specs. 360mm AIO support in a Micro-ATX case is a rarity and definitely a strong selling point. One minor snag I hit was with the PCIe port cover that has to be installed from the back. Once the graphics card was in place, it's a no-go to reattach that cover. Cable management was a breeze for the most part. I was able to tidy up all the cables behind the motherboard tray fairly quickly and neatly. However, I did notice a lack of tie down points on the back side of the panel, which would have been handy for securing the CPU power cable. Even more critical than the build experience is performance, so I put my standard test system, you can check out the full components list in the description below, through its paces inside the DarkRock MH200, comparing it to performance on an open air test bench. The outcomes from an average of 3 AIDA64 stress tests were mixed. The CPU temperature remained steadfast, no increase or decrease when enclosed within the case. The motherboard temperature saw a decrease of 3 degrees. However, the graphics card, total different story. With limited clearance below for ample cooling airflow, the GPU temperature climbed by 7 degrees during a 20-minute Port Royal loop. This increase in GPU temperature is the highest I've recorded among the Micro-ATX cases I've tested recently. When it comes to noise levels, it all hinges on your component choices. Being enveloped in mesh means there's nothing to dampen the sound emitting from your hardware. In my build, the GPU fans do have a 0 RPM mode, the deep cool tower cooler is pretty hushed, and choosing 140mm case fans allowed me to reduce the fan curve to a mere 60% of max speed without impacting CPU temperatures. However, with the GPU gasping for air, its fans did get noisier under load, but to be frank, the system didn't get much louder from when it's housed in the AP201 under gaming stress. That's the compromise with a mesh-wrapped case. And another is dust management. The AP201 would accumulate some dust as the CPU cooler would draw in additional air through the side mesh panel. However, most of the AP201's airflow is directed through the bottom, which is filtered. But there is no dust filter at the front of the MH200, so regular cleaning will be necessary to keep the internals dust free. Before we conclude, let's quickly run through the pros and cons of the DarkRock MH200 from my perspective, starting with the positives. The standout feature is definitely the cooling support. The case offers ample depth for the thickest 240 or 280mm AIOs up top, and the unexpected support for a 360mm radiator to the front is quite rare for a case in this form factor. Plus, with clearance for 165mm tower coolers, you're pretty much covered for any cooling setup you plan on using for your build. Then there's the generous I/O at the front or top of the case, featuring a high-speed USB-C port, something we're beginning to see more of even in budget-friendly cases, which is a big plus. The MH200 also includes an LED selection switch, and while it doesn't come with a built-in RGB control hub, the presence of the switch is convenient for those who might want to add a controller with a standard 2-pin switch connection. The major selling point for me is the design. The pixelated mesh steel gives the case a high-end feel that exceeds its price tag. I'm not hugely into RGB, but this case nicely diffuses RGB lighting from the internals, which is a subtle but attractive feature. Another benefit of the mesh over tempered glass is that if you're aiming for a white PC build, you don't necessarily have to hunt down white components, which are often pricier and harder to find. Now for the drawbacks. The fit and finish leaves something to be desired. I can overlook the use of thinner steel to cut costs, but the panel and chassis misalignments are more pronounced than I'm comfortable with. The lack of a dust filter at the front is a significant oversight. At the very least, a removable mesh filter should be provided to offer users a choice. The most considerable downside is the GPU cooling performance. It may not be an issue for dual slot or lower powered cards, but my Power Color Red Devils triple fan cooler, which is honestly overkill for an RX 6750 XT, experienced unusual temperature increases in this case. And then there are the minor points mentioned in the build experience section. None of these cons are deal breakers on their own, but when added up, I find it hard to recommend the MH200 over the Asus AP201, even with a $15 price difference. However, that's just my take. If you're drawn to the pixelated mesh style and prefer a more traditional layout with the power supply on the bottom and fans at the front, in your budget-friendly compact Micro-ATX enclosure, then the MH200 could be the case for you. Or definitely make sure you're subscribed, because I've got a lineup of unique cases on the way. One in particular is another AP201 lookalike that promises an even more precise replication while shaving off some of the bulk. That review, among others, is on the horizon. Thanks for tuning into this one. If you stuck with me this far, I'm confident I've earned a like, so don't forget to hit that button before you go. Any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll get back to you. And I hope to see you in the next one.